À-bas-le-ciel.
So there are two big issues here. I'm just saying it out loud so I don't forget. The big one you've raised here is what is effective activism and what are we doing with this concept in 2017?
À-bas-le-ciel.
Some types of content are better consumed as a video and some are better consumed as a podcast. This conversation I recorded, you're about to hear a 20-minute excerpt from it, is fully 1 hour and 40 minutes long, brainstorming about the future of veganism, how we can take the human resources we've got here on YouTube and all the other resources we can muster and really start organizing something positive for the future. There's that catchphrase, to save the planet. How would any of us be living our lives? What would any of us be doing with our time if we really were sincerely motivated to save the planet and we weren't just thinking about our next 5,000 views on YouTube? So these are the questions that frame the conversation, and you're about to hear a selection of what we get into in this conversation. The guy I'm talking to, I think he's one of the few people who could claim that he is living his life as if he's trying to save the planet. Stephen Feit. I mispronounce his name, Stephen Fate, but that's me. His preferred pronunciation is Stephen Fight. What's more important in this life, fight or fate? But look, Stephen is a lawyer in Washington, D.C., primarily involved in ecology, environmentalism, etc. And, you know, like many of us, I mean, that may already sound like a wonderful position to be in as a vegan, but like many of us, in his spare time, he comes on YouTube and listens to content from people like myself because in the real world, he knows amazingly few vegans. He's also looking around for the people he can cooperate with and collaborate with to really make something positive happen in the future for veganism, for the environment, for the animals, all those things. So if you are willing to donate $1 per month to support the creation of content like this on Patreon, hit the link below this channel, and you can download the full conversation, 1 hour and 40 minutes long, and then hear it on your MP3 player while you're doing the dishes, while you're on the Stairmaster, while you're shoveling the snow, whatever it is you do.
No, I mean, that brings up something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, especially in the context of your critiques of direct action everywhere, which is, I think, one of the profound challenges for all sorts of vegan activism, not all sorts, sorry, that's not true, for the sort of baseline activism of producing vegans out of non-vegans. Obviously there are, you know, other things that are quite measurable, but a lot of the kind of core baseline activism is really hard to measure in terms of effectiveness. And I know these days effective activism is like the new hot thing and all anyone talks about, and or at least in some circles, maybe the weird corners of the internet that I spend my time on. But I think that we as a population of vegans have to really reckon with this question of what it means to have a lot of our activism be not just we aren't measuring it, but in a lot of ways we don't have good ways of measuring it, or maybe the ways to measure it will be really expensive. And also just this fact that I think, and I could be wrong, I don't know how People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals organizes itself internally, but I have to imagine that a lot of their logic is we need small victories that are consistent, that we can tell our supporters, because it's not easy to say,
I can tell you're from Washington. I can tell you're from Washington. Go on,
But just this idea that as if
you're right, you're
raising money to say we're going to try to convince people to go vegan, and then a year later you have to show people what you did. I mean, you can talk about like what you're doing in the streets, and there are all these huge ad buys in cities all over the world for these go vegan billboards, which I think are awesome. But I just think
well, that
I don't have a solution. I'm just raising a problem.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there with the example you've given. So there are two big issues here. I'm just saying it out loud so I don't forget. The big one you've raised here is what is effective activism and what are we doing with this concept in 2017. But the example you're raising of what PETA does, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, what they really do is, in old-fashioned political parlance, ambulance chasing. You're exactly right. They're always scoring these little victories. And sometimes their connection to the victory is really nebulous. What exactly did you do? Like, they showed up and took credit for it in the press. So I'll give you an example here, because I've just been through their annual report. So PETA donated 66 state-of-the-art surgical simulators to replace the deadly use of thousands of dogs, pigs, and other animals in surgical training programs in 9 countries: Bolivia, Iran, Mexico, and others. So this is the kind of thing they're doing. Now, obviously, I mean, it's so they donated, I'm guessing, 66 fancy computers. You can do a cost estimate on that. I don't know what that is, but it's this ambulance chasing. It's saying, hey, we're doing these little projects all the time. They had this is kind of in terms of pure ambulance chasing. The United States Coast Guard was using animals in cruel and deadly exercises, and PETA released video footage of these cruelties and wrote a bunch of letters to the press and caused a fuss and caused a scandal, and they claim credit for changing the U.S. Coast Guard's policies. Now, how much did PETA actually do? Is PETA actually responsible for the film? I doubt it. I don't know the story, but there are these everyday little victories, and this is how they, earn the loyalty of their donors. And I'm not even going to hate on it. It also has to be said, they're constantly pilloried for this. They have the posters with, sexy women. Whatever percentage of their, advertising revenue comes from that, I don't know. But a lot of people in veganism are using scantily clad women to promote themselves, promote their YouTube channel or what have you. PETA aren't the only ones doing it. But there's certainly a variety of exactly that type of old-fashioned politicking of, you found out the Coast Guard is doing something bad, chase it down, get in the local newspaper, make noise, and then when they buckle, claim the victory. We did it. It's because of us. It's because we wrote the letter to the newspaper or whatever. And I don't even know if they put someone on an airplane who actually showed up to do any of those things. And that's their annual report, is a whole list. It's just an endless list, unorganized list of those types of little ambulance chasing activities. And, I have some respect for that. Some. On the other hand, you have an $11 million budget to print a magazine. I've never seen that magazine on a store shelf. I've never seen it in an airport. I've never seen it in a coffee shop. So a lot of magazines do not have an $11 million budget, a sinking budget, a budget they don't have to earn back, $11 million in charity per year, and yet I managed to see them quite a bit more successful than PETA's magazine that may indeed contain those types of news stories. So yeah, it's a bizarre juxtaposition, to be sure. Okay, what is effective activism? I've got to say I'm really quite depressed by that. I do think that Francione in his newest book manages to kick the ball a little bit further down the field than it has been, because I've seen the concept of effective activism really become a religious concept where people just evoke the name of effective activism to mean whatever it is we already believe in anyway. I don't see any sincere openness to questioning effective activism. And when you talk about measuring effective activism, I mentioned this briefly last time I was talking to Mod Vegan. I was like, well, look, when I was doing this stuff in Cambodia and Laos, we were actually measuring the impacts of programs. There's a protocol called 3IE, Impact Evaluation Protocol, which is an international standard used in charity work, humanitarian development, aid, intervention, what have you. And where you actually are looking at, okay, we spent $10 million trying to prevent the spread of AIDS. How effective was it? And that's real work, and that's research that has a real budget and so on. And now, look, so most of that stuff, the difference is there are actual interventions with actual impacts. I think like most of the stuff we're talking about with veganism, I think everyone involved in this sort of pseudo-religious discourse, they already know there is no impact. There's no impact to measure. So maybe that's why it's so insincere, the question of what is effective advocacy, or what is effective activism. Like I just say, so like a really simple one, in Cambodia, you did an education program to try to teach gay men about AIDS, and you did a baseline survey before the intervention for how often gay men use condoms and a bunch of other questions, and then you did the intervention, And then you did a follow-up survey, maybe 2 years later, and you find out how the behaviors of gay men in Cambodia have changed. That's real impact research. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
that also costs money.
Right. Correct.
Or just to gather the information.
Oh yeah, I used to earn my living that way. That's correct. Yeah, that's political science. Yes, I was paid an incredibly low salary to do that kind of research. But the crux of the thing is, you have an intervention there that actually does have an impact, or could have an impact, or should. Like educating gay men about condoms has an impact. I don't know if anyone in veganism is doing anything they believe in having those impacts to even that modest extent. That, taking someone aside and telling them, hey, look, this is a condom, and this could be a life or death decision for you. Yeah. I put the ball in your court. I don't know what to say after that, No,
I mean, I think it's just, I think there's also, there's a lot of different pessimistic ways I can go. But I guess, I don't know, I'm just going to maybe rattle off a couple of loosely connected thoughts. I think we see the growth of YouTubers or vegan YouTubers, and we see the growth in like vegan food products. And there's so much of this optimism. I mean, Plant-Based News, Klaus just did his like vegan 2016 video, and he was like, we're winning and everything. Yeah. And I think I listened to, when I first discovered who is it, Vegan Revolution, I listened to like 2 of his podcasts. Yeah. And in one of them, he happened to say like, oh yeah, I really think that like vegans are going to be the majority in the UK in like 5 or 6 years. At which point, I think I was walking alone, listening to headphones, and audibly laughed out loud. But just one point of information. For all of this winning that we're doing, in 2016 in the United States consumed more meat than it has any year since 2006. So all those graphs about how meat consumption is declining, is that about meat prices and a global recession? No. Or is that about all of our amazing vegan activism? No. I think probably the former. Yeah. Obviously, from our perspective, veganism is not a fad. It's something that's important. There's a deep intellectual backing behind it. Yeah. But at least in the United States, and to a degree in other countries, at least in Argentina when I was there is a sense in which veganism is riding a cultural wave, and where there's sort of a social signaling that restaurants want to make it very clear that even if you're not vegan, don't worry, we have vegan options, and like we're hip and we're cool. And there is a sense in which veganism is a fad for a large chunk of the relevant discussion. And like all fads, it will fade. And we'll get to this new place where now the thing that restaurants want you to know is that the animals that they're killing and serving you were like, quote unquote, treated humanely. Yeah. And like, no, we don't have vegan options, because don't worry, because all our cows were super happy when we murdered them. Yeah. So that is why I'm broadly pessimistic.
So look, I'm probably the one I just have this video up now saying why I am not left wing. I'm one of the only people who's comfortable with discussing the issue of elitism within veganism, or the interaction between veganism and elitism. And I'll give you one example of good news that I actually could not believe when it was told to me. Like, people say that I don't believe it in a casual way. I mean, I actually sat there thinking, is this a lie? Is the person telling me this insane? An old friend of mine, someone I've known for ages, who is a philosophy major in Europe and who goes to a lot of philosophy conferences, so academic conferences for people who generally have PhDs in philosophy or that kind of thing. She said that in the Netherlands, veganism is so common in that elite social class that on the forms you fill out when attending a philosophy conference in the Netherlands, it says dietary restrictions other than vegan. They no longer have a check mark for vegan because such a large percentage of the people showing up were vegan and the conference is going to be vegan anyway. So she told me that the forms now, they don't have a check mark for vegan. So this is among people who are, specialized. Some of them will be undergraduates, some of them will be graduates, but these are people who are philosophy majors at whatever level. Dietary preferences other than vegan. There's no box for vegan. And I sat there, and I know her. I've known her for years. She's not insane. But, I was actually wondering, has she gone insane? This can't be true. I can't believe this. I was, I calmed down, but that's so hard for me to believe. Now, for me, I think this does not contradict any of the points you made. Vegans are an incredibly small minority of the population. They're a self-selecting minority. And I think they are going to reflect certain elite tendencies. A lot of people on the left want to pretend that the vegans represent the poor and downtrodden of the world, that they're the workers of the world rising up to take over ownership of the factories in some kind of Marxist fantasy. I do not see it that way. Within India, vegetarianism is elitist. It always has been for at least 3,000 years, possibly 5,000 years. And the idea of becoming vegetarian as you move up in the social hierarchy in India, moving up was very hard to do. That's reflected in society. And there obviously is a sense in which the ruling class of California, the leisured class of California, people who own yoga mats and have the time and leisure to go to the gym and do yoga, people who are of a certain level of affluence, they definitely are associated with veganism. And that can be a powerful thing in a positive way. And of course, it's going to be a powerful thing with a certain kind of stigma attached to it in a negative way. So look, I bring this back to Klaus, to the example you mentioned. Klaus has this video, the year in 2016. Klaus and I talk a little bit. We're not super close friends, but I just mentioned we're in touch. And Klaus wanted my reaction to that video. He said, look, could you watch the video and tell me what you think about it? So I did watch the whole thing, which otherwise I wouldn't have, to be honest with you. And there's a moment in that video from a protest in London that just happened where they had 2,000 people at this protest, apparently. That's from memory, but I think it was a 2,000 people protest in London. It was a pro-vegan, protest. And they have these very dramatic speeches, these people sitting there and screaming about how they're going to change the world or some shit. And how next year they could have 20,000 people instead of 2,000 people or whatever. And, I said to Klaus in my email, I said, to me, this is not a victory. 2,000 people who show up in a park and then go home afterwards is not a victory. What I am interested in instead, and you come from a political background in Washington, you'll relate to this immediately. I want to know how many of those 2,000 people have each other's phone numbers now. How many of them will still know each other 1 year from now? In the United States, I read a hard political science report on the success of the so-called Tea Party movement, which really was a plurality of small movements. But the long story short about this hard political science research was the mainstream press thinks the Tea Party is a joke. It's not a joke. And they looked at, over time, how many of the Tea Party groups were still having monthly meetings, monthly town hall meetings. At those monthly meetings, what percentage of the people knew on a first-name basis or had a phone number for or an email for other people in the group? All the kind of classical old-school measures of social capital. They were actually meeting, actually cooperating, and those were town hall meetings that had homework. Incredibly rare in any kind of sincere, where they would meet and they would say, okay, before the next meeting, we need everyone to read this legislation or, some technical document, related to local city hall or the local state legislature. We need everyone to read it before you come back. So before you can attend the next meeting, whether it's 2 weeks later or a month later, you can photocopy it, but here are the documents you need to read. And the people would actually do it and come back. So the point was, yes, the Tea Party may not have maintained headline status in the newspapers. Why would they? They actually did form classical, real units cohesive social organization, and they were effective in lobbying their local governments for a list of social changes they wanted. I'm looking at this protest in London. Maybe I'm a cynic. I don't think anyone there was making those kinds of connections. I don't think there's the basis for a movement to do anything. I don't think I'm looking at a movement at all. And I'd be delighted if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean that also, I don't know if this is the perception that you've gotten, but something that occurred to me recently, and again, this is going back to the fight that I guess is being spearheaded by Cheetah about like whether we should have hard thresholds about like what veganism is and isn't, and I guess dredging up like the Francione type debates. Is I get the sense that at least on YouTube, there's a real feeling that like veganism started basically when like Freely started her YouTube channel. Yeah. Or even that was like proto-veganism, and that veganism's really only been around since like 2012 or 2013. Yeah. And it's remarkable to me how there is no collective sense of any kind of intellectual or even just a factual history of a group of people that identify as vegans and have been doing this for not a very long time, but many decades. Yes. And there's no interest in what was happening before. It's just I don't know of any movement that has that kind of not a disdain, but just a complete indifference to its history. And I mean, you can look at, I recently became not super well versed, but familiar with the, the debates between, I guess it was Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois in the United States in the early 20th century and in the civil rights movement. I don't know if those debates have a ton of applicability to civil rights struggles today. Yeah. But I do know that like when thinking about civil rights, you would want to learn and read about that. Right. And it's remarkable to me how ahistorical so many, and maybe this is a YouTube thing, maybe this is a young people thing, maybe it's just that we don't have. Yeah,
I'll be devil's advocate on that one, because I've been going through the more academic literature lately. As you know, some of the stuff I've put up as book reviews, and in some cases I've actually made videos that are Patreon exclusive, apologizing that I'm not going to do the book review because the book is so stupid or so crazy. Like a lot of the academic discourse is garbage. But one of the reasons why people forget is sometimes that they want to forget. And, no, in a sense, no surprise there. But, I tried to kind of lead my YouTube channel in having a set of real reflections on how much veganism has changed just since the year 2001, when the big noise, the big, the real debates were under the heading of anarcho-primitivism. And, just a few people were interested in talking about that with me, but most people feel very alienated and very unfamiliar and afraid. But there were a couple of people who said, yeah, I remember that stuff. They can remember the Shack 7, the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty group, and the debates at that time. But like just the difference, so that's 15 years, 2001 versus 2016, when that, of course, now it's 2017. But I'm just saying, we use a round number here. At the time, so this is 15 years looking back in history, and in many ways, it's not recognizable as the same movement, which I think is a legitimate point. Like, what was going on in 2001 from the perspective of 2016 is not the same movement. And we just did this debate, well, not even debate, we did this discussion between myself and Mod Vegan, and we're looking at Peter Singer, who's still alive, I believe. I don't even think he's dead yet. And Peter Singer's version of veganism is no longer recognizable as veganism. I don't know if you want to call that 20 years. I don't know, or 30 years or 10 years. I don't even know. I don't want to put a date on Peter Singer's veganism. But some of his publications are from more than 30 years ago. But I don't know to put a single year on when that was current. So actually, in many, many ways, I think it is true that, definitely the spirit of the moment more than anybody else is defined by Gary Francione. I say that even though I'm a critic of his. I do think that the kind of default idea of what veganism is now is basically the abolitionist idea. With that having been said, I have open right here Gary Francione's YouTube channel, and I'm looking at 300 views, 153 views, 168 views. The Francione's message can be summarized in just a few sentences, and we've all heard it before, and nobody wants to hear it anymore. I think veganism is moving on. But those kinds of simple fundamental assumptions about what veganism is, I'm devil's advocate on this one. I think that the collective amnesia, the lack of interest in even the recent past of this movement, reflects the fact that we can't even recognize those precedents as being part of the same movement.
À-bas-le-ciel.